The blade hovered a millimeter from Rebecca's skin, its cold edge catching the fluorescent barracks light like a signal flare no one dared acknowledge. The room had gone hollow, stripped of sound. Even the ventilation hum seemed to hold its breath. Cadets stood locked in place, postures rigid, throats tight, eyes wide in that unmistakable "this is wrong" stillness that settles over soldiers when a line has been crossed. Nathan's grip on the training knife was too tight, knuckles whitening as adrenaline pulsed through a hand that had stopped listening to reason. A tick fluttered beneath his left eye, tiny, involuntary, betraying the conflict between his bravado and the sudden, creeping understanding that he had taken this too far. The blade trembled, just slightly. Rebecca noticed. She noticed everything. Rebecca didn't flinch, not once. Her breathing stayed controlled, combatressed pace, as though her neck weren't inches from steel, but resting against the frame of a familiar door. Shoulders relaxed, gaze lowered, every muscle calibrated with the quiet precision of someone who had survived worse than a reckless cadet, with a dull blade and an inflated ego. Her hands remained loosely at her sides, fingers relaxed, wedding band callus visible on her left hand, another detail Nathan hadn't registered. She murmured something, barely audible, not pleading, not fearful. A sound closer to a reminder, soft, almost patient. Nathan leaned in by instinct, hungry to catch the words, but before they reached him, the color of her training uniform shifted. A small metal glint peeked from inside the seam. A clipped patch, wrong shape, wrong color. Wrong classification for any recruit. Nathan froze. His focus narrowed to a pinprick as he registered the gold-trimmed insignia, the matte black background, the coded identification strip nearly invisible unless one knew exactly what to look for. His throat locked as the letters materialized in his mind, one by one, like a verdict. DVGRU Gold Squadron Evaluation Authority for a heartbeat. He forgot to breathe. The blade dipped his hand, losing all pretense of control. Sweat gathered at the corner of his scalp, a single drop sliding past his temple and dripping from his jawline onto the barracks floor. Rebecca's eyes lifted just enough for him to see them, calm, unshaken, a still surface hiding depth he had never even attempted to measure. He stepped back as if someone had yanked an invisible cord tied to the center of his chest. The knife lowered, his arm hung limp, pulse erratic. His mouth opened but no sound followed, just the shallow drag of air scraping against vocal cords that refused to obey. Behind him, one cadet's boot creaked against the floor, an involuntary shift. Another cadet swallowed hard, throat bobbing. The room stayed locked in a rigid tableau, every witness aware that they had just seen something that should not exist at their level. A DevGru operator, here, disguised as them, standing silent and still while a trainee had put a blade to her throat. Rebecca didn't reprimand him, she didn't move. She simply exhaled, slow, controlled, a deliberate reset of the moment. Her gaze flicked once toward the far wall, toward the instructor's office, as if calculating angles, distances, variables, a habit, muscle memory, not fear. The silence settled deeper, like dust after a detonation, uncomfortable, total. Nathan finally managed a whisper, broken, hoarse, "What are you?" Rebecca didn't answer. She didn't need to. The patch had already spoken for her. A beat of tension held the room in suspension, every cadet, aware that something seismic had just shifted but not yet understanding the scale of it. And then, like a voice emerging from deep water, the narration of events pulled everything backward, unraveling the moment thread by thread. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back in time. Rebecca moved through the training compound with the deliberate subtlety of someone who had mastered the art of invisibility. Not the desperate invisibility of a nervous recruit. Hers was controlled, intentional, like a low-light operator adjusting to shadows. She tucked herself naturally at the edge of formations, never out of place, never drawing attention, and yet nothing escaped her. Her gaze drifted across the environment with a slow, predatory sweep, cataloging minor details, the slack-muzzled discipline of one recruit, the inconsistent footwork of another, the slight misalignment in the rappel tower's anchor points. She noticed all of it without letting a single reaction reach her face. She executed each assignment with surgical efficiency. Field strip, course run, land navigation prep. Her hands moved with quiet certainty, movements smooth, economical, betraying years of muscle memory. Even when she slowed down intentionally, forcing imperfection, The motions carried a precision that didn't belong to a woman supposedly starting from zero. Nathan watched her with that trademark smirk he wore like a pearly fitted mask. He circled the squat with a swagger that telegraphed insecurity more than dominance. His boots scraped the gravel, loudly announcing territory rather than commanding it. When he passed Rebecca, he let the back of his knuckles tap her shoulder, a little to hard, a little to performative. "Careful with that gear, princess," he said, voice pitched just loud enough for the others to hear. "Wouldn't want you breaking a nail." Rebecca didn't look up, not even a flicker of acknowledgement. The only visible response was the faint tightening at the corner of her jaw, 0.5 millimeter, a microscopic flex that lasted shorter than a breath. Nathan misread it as fear. Sergeant Miller did not. From where he stood, arms crossed over his chest, Miller observed with the detached, calculating eye of someone accustomed to reading battlefield cues in human behavior. And Rebecca presented a series of cues that made no sense. Her posture stayed low center, weight always balanced slightly forward on the balls of her feet, classic combat-ready stance. No recruit moved like that naturally. Her eyes didn't dart. They scanned. Slow, methodical, the watchfulness of someone trained not just to participate in exercises, but to evaluate them. Then there were her physical tells, subtle but unmistakable to someone who'd spent years around operators, wine scoring through her hairline. Thin, pale streaks where strands grew in slightly off pattern. The kind of wind-burned sea, after repetitive high-altitude, low-opening jumps, halo marks no civilian course would ever produce. And on her forearm, half hidden under the sleeve cuff, Miller caught the edge of a scar. Not the clean line of a surgical cut, a jagged groove. Shallow entry, lateral tear, ricochet, probably 5.56 based on width, though degraded over time. Not accidental, not cosmetic, that was a story earned. Nathan snorted when he saw Rebecca complete her field strip drill 6 seconds faster than the next recruit. "Oh look," he barked, clapping twice in mock celebration. "She can follow instructions." "Someone give her a medal." A few recruits chuckled under their breath, eager to stay on Nathan's good side. But even in their laughter, their eyes darted nervously. Something about her quietness unsettled them. People feared silence more than aggression. Rebecca reassembled the weapon without raising her gaze. Her breathing remained even. But beneath that stillness, something in her eyes shifted the faintest glint, like a lens calibrating. Miller caught it, and with it, the rest of the puzzle pieces he'd been trying to ignore clicked into place. The woman in front of him did not belong at the bottom of the pipeline. She didn't move like them, didn't look like them, didn't flinch like them. She blended in only because she wanted to. Because she had decided that was the correct move. Miller's thumb tapped his folded arms, one slow, rhythmic beat, the unconscious tell he used when evaluating classified profiles. He studied her for another long second, his gaze narrowing. Something didn't add up, not even close. Night settled over the training grounds with the kind of heavy, oppressive stillness that made every sound feel amplified. The patrol exercise began under red light discipline, each recruit moving in staggered formation, boots sinking into damp earth. Rebecca stayed mid-column, her silhouette compact, posture disciplined, rifle angled precisely at low ready. No wasted motion, no detectable ego, just presence, quiet, measured, lethal in its restraint. Nathan drifted near the rear, pretending to monitor spacing while subtly tapping at the device strapped inside his forearm pouch. A faint electronic chirp, almost imperceptible under the hiss of wind through pine needles, confirmed the upload. He smirked, digital map coordinates shifted, azimuth skewed by just enough degrees to divert one person off course. He timed the alteration to occur right as Rebecca's GPS sensed. A recruit without specialized training would follow the corrupted data straight into a dead zone. He waited. He wanted to see confusion. Maybe panic, but Rebecca didn't break stride. She paused for a fraction of a second, a small hitch, like a heartbeat skipping once. Her eyes flicked to the corner of her display, expression unreadable. Then her fingers adjusted the bezel on her wrist compass with deliberate precision. One micro inhale, the kind someone takes while settling into a firing position. She looked up, recalculated the terrain, mentally reconstructing the grid without relying on corrupted inputs. Nathan's smirk faltered. The patrol continued deeper into the timberline. A recruit near the end of the file stumbled, drifting several meters outside formation. His breathing grew erratic, fogging the air in uneven bursts. He checked his map twice, confusion tightening his jaw. He turned in a slow, lost arc, shoulders curling inward. Before he could signal distress, Rebecca moved. Her hand rose in a silent gesture, crisp, authoritative, the kind only seen in units with advanced small unit communication protocols. She closed the distance between them in a fluid, controlled approach, no nose, no hesitation. She tapped the recruit's shoulder, redirected his orientation with a subtle pressure, and pointed toward the true bearing. The recruit's eyes widened. He nodded, breath catching in his throat, and returned to formation with the shaky relief of someone who just avoided a public failure. The entire maneuver took less than 4 seconds. Nathan stared, jaw tightening, nostrils flaring in a suppressed exhale. That wasn't luck, that wasn't instinct, that was training, the kind not found in basic pipeline manuals. Up ahead, Sergeant Miller slowed his pace just enough to glance back. His face remained stoic, but the tension around his eyelids shifted, a slight constriction, the kind he couldn't quite hide. He replayed the sequence in his mind with the precision of an operations analyst. She noticed the faulty azimuths instantly. She corrected without instruments. She executed communication protocols not taught at this level. His eyes narrowed, a barely visible contraction of the orbicularis muscle. The look of a man who had found another piece of a puzzle he did not remember being assigned. The patrol regrouped near an abandoned outpost checkpoint. While the recruits knelt to hydrate, Rebecca stepped aside, scanning the environment under the guise of maintaining 360-degree security. Her boots pressed lightly into the dirt as she moved, weight distributed perfectly to avoid noise. She brushed past a weathered supply crate, and her hand froze mid-motion, something metallic glinted beneath it. She crouched, posture shrinking inward, movements disguised as a routine equipment check. 2 fingers reached under the crate and retrieved a small, matte black card, lightweight, smooth, embedded with a microdata strip. A military encryption port sat along the top edge. Stamped on the corner, barely visible in the dim red light, were 2 characters, EV2. Her pulse didn't spike, not visibly. But her breathing paused for a single, taut second, the kind of micro-halt only someone trained in stress inoculation would consciously suppress. EV2 was not standard issue, not for recruits, not for instructors. It belonged to one category only, internal evaluation programs. Rebecca slid the card into the inner pocket of her vest with movements so small they vanished into the dark. Somewhere behind her, Miller watched her shoulders shift as she stood. His fingers curled slightly around his hydration tube, the closest thing he showed to surprise. The classroom smelled of machine oil, dry paper, and the faint metallic tang of overheated electronics. Rows of recruits sat before battered cryptography consoles, each screen flickering with the opening parameters of the drill. Sergeant Miller stood at the front, arms crossed, expression neutral, but there was a subtle rigidity in his stance, a straightening of the back that suggested he already anticipated friction. The task was simple by military standards: decrypt a short-encoded message using the standard ROT-based procedure, then validate authentication markers, 15 minutes. That was the benchmark for competent performance. Recruits who excelled usually finished 10-12. No one had ever broken 10. Rebecca sat quietly at her terminal. Her shoulders were relaxed, spine aligned with quiet precision. Her breathing barely moved her chest, the trained stillness of someone who knew how to conserve oxygen under pressure, someone accustomed to working in environments where sound got people killed. The timer began, keyboards clatter. It's a room filled with the jittering tempo of stressed recruits pounding through trial-and-error sequences, a few mutter under their breath. Nathan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest, eyes drifting toward Rebecca with a smirk that sharpened at the edges. She didn't type immediately, she studied the ciphertext with a stillness that unsettled those closest to her. Her eyes traced invisible patterns, not the rot chain used in basic training, but deeper sequences. Her fingertips hovered above the keys, then moved in a controlled burst of inputs, no pauses, no uncertainty. She wasn't testing possibilities, she was executing a known method. A method no one there had been taught. Miller noticed first. His jaw tightened by a barely perceptible millimeter. Rebecca's hand shifted to the manual override on the console, inputting AS-FA sequence, Special Operations Forces, Advanced. A protocol restricted to high-clearance units. Her movements were economical, almost surgical, bypassing redundancies, jumping directly to authentication layers the recruits didn't even know existed. At 2 minutes, Nathan stopped pretending to work. His foot tapped once, twice, a small tick that betrayed the anxiety he tried to mask behind a lazy grin. At 2 minutes and 40 seconds, Rebecca leaned back slightly. Her thumb pressed the enter key with quiet finality. The machine chirped, solved. 3 minutes, exactly. She didn't look around, she didn't smirk. She simply folded her hands over the edge of the console, eyes lowering as if giving the others space to finish. Murmurs rippled. Recruits exchanged glances, unsure whether they'd witness skill or something mechanical, something pre-programmed. Nathan pushed his chair back just enough for the legs to scrape the floor, a little theatrical flourish of irritation. His voice carried just loud enough to be heard across the rows. "Did you hack that?" The words were coded in mockery, but his right hand curled subtly on the desk, fingers blanching at the knuckles. Rebecca didn't move, didn't speak. Her silence had weight, an unbroken line of discipline that made the mockery ricochet back at Nathan harder than any verbal retaliation could. The timer continued for the others. Miller walked the aisles, observing. His boots were silent on the rubber flooring, but his attention was unmistakably anchored to Rebecca. When he passed behind her, his peripheral vision caught a motion at her wrist. It was small, deliberate. She angled her forearm slightly away from the group, using the console as partial cover. Her fingers adjusted the bezel on her watch, marking time intervals with a sequence too rhythmic to be random. Miller's breath stalled for half a second. It wasn't fidgeting, it wasn't stress. It was a timing pattern. The same technique used by infiltration teams to track entry windows, extraction intervals, and synchronize breach timing during blacked-out operations. Her wrist lowered again. The pattern was logged, hidden, precise. When she finally looked up, her eyes didn't search for approval or acknowledgement. They simply returned to neutral, calm, quiet, unreadable. And Miller knew, with the steady sinking sensation of a man confirming an impossible suspicion, that whatever Rebecca Hayes was doing here, she wasn't doing it as a recruit. The sun had barely crested the horizon when the breaching simulation began, dragging long shadows across the kill house. The air held a dry chill, the kind that sharpened every sound, metal clacking, Velcro fastening, boots grinding over gravel. Recruits lined up outside the mock structure, each one geared in basic CQB equipment, helmets, training plates, inert rifles. The tension in the formation was muted but present, expressed in the small betrayals of the body. A thumb tapping against a magazine well, a jaw tightening, a shallow pulse visible at the base of the throat. Rebecca stood second from the front, posture straight, but not rigid. She blended into the group with the same deliberate anonymity she carried everywhere. A quiet silhouette, controlled breathing, hands steady against the grip of her rifle. Her gaze swept the structure, noting entry points, stress points in the wall panels, the angle of daylight bleeding through the windows. Nothing escaped her. Sergeant Miller oversaw the setup, supervising the placement of a small instructional breaching charge. It was a training device, a low-yield simulation used to teach timing, spacing, and follow-through. Harmless in theory, adverse only in practice. But as the instructor armed it, the device emitted a sharp electronic click, followed by a rapid sequence of indicator flashes. The wrong sequence, Rebecca registered it first. A fractional tension flickered through the muscles around her eyes, the kind of micro-expression that came from instant recognition of a malfunction. The indicator panel flashed red, then locked into a continuous pattern, pre-detonation mode. The instructor froze for a beat, to lawn. Rebecca didn't. She dropped to one knee beside the device, her movement fluid, silent, trained. Her hands hovered a few millimeters above the housing, assessing, confirming with tactile precision. The casing was polymer, standard for instructional devices. The arming wire was intact, but the internal trigger circuit was stuck in a loop. She exhaled once, low and steady, then reached in with 2 fingers to release the bypass catch. "Training charge," she said. Voice low, calm. Circuits locked, disengaging. Her tone carried no panic, only authority. the kind that came from years of muscle memory formed under real pressure, not classroom drills. The instructor blinked, startled, as if watching someone step into his own job. Rebecca flipped a release and severed the trigger loop with a sharp, precise motion. The indicator lights died instantly, then she stood, turning toward the recruits with a command presence that no trainee should have possessed. "Dack up. Move. Clear the entry corridor." Her voice cut through the yard like a controlled detonation of its own. Firm, direct, not loud but impossible to ignore. Recruits reacted instinctively, stepping back, widening distance, eyes darting between her and the device. Even those who didn't understand what had gone wrong could feel the weight of the moment. Miller didn't intervene. His gaze hardened slightly, a narrowing of the eyes that came with the realization he was observing someone far outside the scope of the program. Someone who had no business being underestimated. Nathan finally broke the silence. "Oh, come on," he scoffed, stepping forward with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. She interfered. "It was part of the drill. You can't just jump in like your EOD." His voice pitched upward at the last word, betraying a sliver of uncertainty he tried to hide behind bravado. Rebecca didn't look at him. She didn't give him the satisfaction of acknowledgement. Her attention stayed on the device, ensuring the circuit remained dead, hands steady, movements clean. Nathan's jaw twitched, a tiny spasm near the hinge, frustration building under the surface. Miller stepped closer, boots crunching over the gravel. His stare pinned Nathan with the kind of calm, compressed authority that erased arguments. "She prevented an uncontrolled discharge of a malfunctioning device," he said, voice level. "You don't call that interference." Nathan tried to hold eye contact, but his gaze slipped downward after a half-second. His throat bobbed in a tight swallow. Rebecca straightened, turning her body slightly to scan the perimeter, as if still evaluating residual risk, a quiet professional habit. One that didn't belong here, not at this level. Then, a faint vibration buzzed against her hip. She didn't react immediately. She waited for Nathan's attention to drift, for his smirk to return and for the other recruits to reassemble. When eyes were no longer pinned to her, she slipped a hand under her vest and retrieved a small, matte black pager. Not civilian, not instructional, military-grade encryption. Only a handful of units nationwide still use them for black-level mission updates. The screen displayed a single line, "Evaluation mission phase 2 authorized." Her breath caught, not visibly, but internally, a silent pause held deep in her chest. Then she tucked the pager away, expression unreadable, posture reset to neutral. Only Miller noticed the faint tension that settled across her shoulders, the kind that came not from fear, but from a shift into operational mindset. Miller stayed in his office long after the other instructors cleared out, the dim overhead light casting a narrow cone across Rebecca Hayes' personnel file. He rubbed the back of his neck, thumb pressing into a knot of tension that hadn't been there before she arrived. Every time he flipped a page, another inconsistency surfaced. Training blocks with dates that didn't align. Schools she should have been to junior or to senior to attend. Gaps that looked intentional, like someone had redacted without bothering to use black ink. He tapped his pen against the table, a muted, rhythmic click betraying a pulse of unease. He wasn't reading a normal candidate's history, he was reading a controlled fabrication. Outside, in the cool pre-dawn air, Rebecca stood alone near the empty running track, stretching with slow, precise movements. Her breath fogged briefly before vanishing, her face calm, but inwardly calculating. When she shifted into a lateral bend, her shirt rode up just slightly, revealing the faint arc of a scar curving along her left flank. The skin was puckered, old but unmistakable shrapnel, the kind produced by maritime breaching charges or close quarters fragmentation. It wasn't the kind of wound someone got in training. It was the kind acquired in places no paperwork ever openly acknowledged. She paused mid-stretch, jaw tightening for a fraction of a second, as if the memory behind that scar flickered somewhere just beyond reach. Then she straightened, expression polished back to neutrality, the mask she had perfected long before arriving here. Footsteps approached steady, confident, and slightly heavier on the right side. Nathan, even before she turned, her hand drifted instinctively to her hip, fingers brushing the encrypted pager clipped inside her waistband. The small vibration it had given her minutes earlier still echoed in her nerves like a phantom pulse. She shut it off with a practiced thumb movement, screen going dark just as Nathan's shadow lengthened beside her. "You're out early," he said, forcing a casual tone. But his right eye twitched the moment he noticed the way she angled her body, subtle, defensive, like she was shielding something. He crossed his arms, shoulders rolling back just enough to assert dominance. She only nodded, not offering more. Nathan watched her for a beat too long, trying to read a woman who had spent her entire life ensuring she couldn't be read. "You handled that breaching incident pretty fast yesterday," he said. His grin was thin, sharp, almost like you've done it before. Rebecca's face didn't change, but her breath paused for half a second before resuming, barely visible unless someone was studying her with intent. "I followed the procedure," she replied, tone controlled, stripped of any emotional data he could weaponize. Nathan didn't buy it. A sliver of suspicion glinted behind his eyes, and he leaned in just a fraction. "Funny, that didn't look like our procedure." For an instant, her fingers curled into a fist at her side, small, tight, then released. Nathan caught the movement, and something like triumph flickered across his mouth. He thought he had struck a nerve. He hadn't. She was simply calculating the minimum amount of force required if he ever got too close again. He stepped back with a self-satisfied nod and walked off, boots grinding against the asphalt. Rebecca didn't move until the echo of his footsteps dissolved. Later, back in her barracks room, she unmade her bed with slow, precise motions, the muscle memory of someone who knew inspections better than sleep. As she lifted the thin mattress, her hand brushed against something that hadn't been there that morning. A folder edges soft from handling tucked just out of normal sight. Her pulse kicked once, hard. She pulled it free. An internal conduct evaluation document, the exact type used for covert assessments inside special operations units. The paper smelled faintly of old dust and institutional ink, the kind that never completely washed out no matter how many hands touched it. No name on the front, no dates, only the designation, IC for 7B. Her thumb hovered over the seal. Her breath held in her chest, ribs barely moving. Someone had placed this here, someone who knew exactly who she was, and who she was evaluating. When she opened the folder, her eyes narrowed just slightly, but enough to harden the air around her. Someone was escalating the game. The battalion auditorium had been polished to ceremonial perfection, rows of chairs aligned with geometric precision, flags positioned at exact regulation angles, brass fixtures wiped until they reflected every movement like still water disrupted by a single touch. The hum of pre-event conversation rolled through the room, low and controlled, punctuated by the shuffle of dress shoes on varnished floors and the metallic clink of metals brushing against formal uniforms. Rebecca stood near the rear wall, posture straight but deliberately unremarkable. Her hands were clasped behind her back, fingers still and relaxed, though the subtle tension in her forearms betrayed an internal calculation. She scanned the room once, clean, efficient, nothing out of place. Her breathing was deep but quiet, like she had learned long ago to use oxygen as a weapon against nerves. Nathan hovered near the front row, bouncing lightly on the balls of his feet, a tick he couldn't hide, when he felt a rush of self-importance. He watched her from across the room with a look sharpened into intent, an intent he believed only he understood. His jaw shifted from side to side, a practiced gesture he used before making a move he thought would elevate him. Today, he wanted to humiliate her publicly. When the commanding officer stepped up to the podium, the crowd quieted. Officers in service dress took their seats. Civilian guests, the kind who didn't understand the difference between military formality and military gravity, settled into their seats with polite anticipation. The room shifted into protocol discipline. Nathan's moment. He moved toward Rebecca with performative confidence, his uniform crisp, ribbons gleaming. As he approached, his nostrils flared slightly, a tell of adrenaline, not courage. He extended an arm toward her shoulder, not touching, but asserting that he could, if he wanted. Rebecca didn't flinch. She simply angled her chin half an inch downward, giving herself a smaller target and eliminating any unnecessary reaction. "Recruit Hayes," Nathan said, projecting his voice loud enough for several nearby officers to turn. Front and center, several heads turned. A few whispers cut through the formal quiet. Rebecca's step forward was controlled, measured, almost serene. The leather of her dress shoes emitted a soft, grounded tap with each stride. Her eyes remained forward, expression blank enough to read as obedient but calm enough to suggest she was neither intimidated nor confused. Nathan placed himself beside the podium, ensuring maximum visibility. His smile was tight, lips stretched but never reaching his eyes. He inhaled a breath meant to steady him, but his fingers betrayed him, tapping twice against his thigh, a stutter of nerves slipping through the facade. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, lifting his chin with theatrical authority, "I'd like to present an example of why standards matter." Murmurs rippled across the front row of officers. Some shifted in their seats, others folded their arms, skeptical. Civilians leaned in slightly, curiosity sharpening their posture. Rebecca stood silent. Nathan gestured toward her with an open palm, as if offering evidence. "This recruit has failed to demonstrate even basic competence in multiple evolutions. And yet," he paused for effect, "she insists she is performing appropriately." A few eyebrows raised, no one clapped, the silence thickened. Rebecca's only movement was a subtle tightening of the muscles along her jawline, not anger, but the quiet preparation of someone evaluating a threat vector. Then, from the side of the room, Miller stepped into view. He didn't interrupt, he didn't speak. He simply folded his arms, weight shifting to his left leg, eyes narrowing in a way that suggested he was measuring Nathan's behavior with surgical interest. His gaze flicked briefly to Rebecca, just long enough to convey that he had seen every evolution, every detail Nathan had conveniently omitted. Nathan continued, louder now, trying to reclaim control. "This right here is what happens when someone thinks they can bypass the process. When someone expects to coast through training without earning it." Rebecca remained motionless, but her breathing shifted, one shallow inhale, one deeper exhale, the precise respiratory rhythm of someone mitigating rising tension with discipline. The commanding officer looked from Nathan to Rebecca, expression unreadable. Miller watched all of it with a fascination he didn't try to hide. The slight crease forming between his brows signaled he had already begun forming conclusions far more accurate than Nathan suspected. Nathan straightened his uniform, preparing to land the final blow. He thought he was about to expose her. He had no idea what he was actually revealing. For a long moment, the auditorium held its breath. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, casting a pale sheen across polished brass and sharply creased uniforms. Nathan stood beside Rebecca as if he were presenting a captured flaw, a defect he had dug out of the ranks with heroic initiative. His chest rose with shallow, anticipatory breaths. A single bead of sweat formed near his temple and clung there, refusing to fall. Rebecca had remained silent through every accusation, every pause Nathan used for dramatic effect. But now something shifted, barely perceptible, but enough for Miller, standing along the wall, to straighten by a fraction of an inch. Her shoulders eased, no longer approximating the posture of a recruit accepting reprimand, but that of an operator settling into her true frame. Then she spoke. Her voice didn't rise, it didn't need to. It cut through the air with clinical precision. "Very well," she said, her tone neutral, almost calm. Evaluation concluded. A few officers blinked. Nathan's brow pinched, confused, his mouth parting slightly, as if the script he'd written for this moment no longer fit. Rebecca reached into the inner seam of her uniform shirt, slow, deliberate movement, fingers steady. She withdrew a hard-case credential envelope, matte black with a gold-trimmed edge. The type issued only for the highest classified identities. The magnetic latch clicked open with a soft, authoritative snap. She presented it to the commanding officer first. Then she spoke again, enunciating each word with the deliberate clarity of a sworn statement. "Lieutenant Commander Rebecca Hayes," she announced. "DevGru Gold Squadron, Operation Cerberus. Internal Evaluation Authority." The silence that followed was deeper than before. No whispers, no shifting in seats, not even the rustle of fabric. It was the silence of recalibration, as an entire room rewrote their understanding in real time. Nathan took half a step back, his throat tightened visibly, Adam's apple rising with a harsh swallow. His pupils dilated, scanning the badge again as if hoping it would change under a second look. Rebecca continued, "I was deployed here under direct authorization of NSW Command," she said. "Tasked with assessing conduct, ethics, and resilience within your current training cycle." The words conduct and ethics hung in the air like the distant echo of a warning shot. Nathan opened his mouth, but no sound followed. His left hand twitched just a slight opening and closing of fingers, the body's involuntary reaction when it searches for a defense that doesn't exist. Rebecca reached into her other pocket and retrieved a compact encrypted device. One tap, another, a small projector activated, casting a sharp, high-resolution audio waveform and timestamp across the rear wall. Then the playback began. Nathan's voice. His tone mocking, confident, believing himself untouchable as he altered coordinates, displaced gear, manipulated tasks, and issued derogatory remarks about weak recruits. Every sabotage, every violation, recorded with absolute clarity. Gasps whispered through the audience. A civilian woman covered her mouth with one trembling hand. An officer in the second row clenched his jaw so tightly a muscle twitched at the hinge. Miller didn't move, he merely watched Nathan's face with the intensity of a man who now understood how every puzzle piece fit together. Nathan's mask collapsed slowly. First his eyelids fluttered rapid blinks betraying panic. His shoulders pulled inward as if trying to shrink inside his uniform. His lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. Rebecca ended the recording. The machine fell silent. For several long seconds, the room held a reverent stillness. Then, somewhere near the back, a single pair of hands began to clap. Slow, deliberate, measured. Another pair joined, then another. Until the entire auditorium began to rise, officers, civilians, trainees forming a standing ovation that built not from excitement, but from respect. The kind that has weight, the kind that acknowledges the presence of someone operating far above the standard. Rebecca didn't smile, she didn't nod. Her expression remained controlled, posture straight, composure absolute. A quiet professional receiving acknowledgement she neither sought nor required. Miller stepped forward at last. He approached her with precision, each step exact, each movement carrying the silent code of someone who recognized rank not by insignia, but by presence. He stopped a few feet from her, heels clicking together with crisp finality. Then he saluted, a full, formal, regulation-perfect salute. Not to a recruit, not even to an officer, but to the person who had just revealed the entire truth with unflinching clarity. Rebecca returned the salute slowly, her gaze steady, her breathing calm, her eyes reflecting none of the triumph that filled the room, only resolute duty. The aftermath unfolded with the cold efficiency of military procedure. No raised voices, no chaos. Just the controlled, almost clinical rhythm of justice being executed by those with authority to enforce it. Higher command arrived within the hour. 2 officers from Naval Special Warfare's Inspectorate Division, their presence announced not by ceremony, but by a subtle shift in posture among everyone who recognized their insignia. Their boots struck the linoleum with the deliberate cadence of individuals whose reports shaped careers or ended them. Nathan stood between them, shoulders tight, breathing shallow. His right eye twitched a rapid, involuntary flutter at the outer corner, each microspasm betraying panic that his rigid stance couldn't conceal. He kept clenching and unclenching his fingers, the glove on his left hand creaking as the material strained. The senior inspector read the charges without theatricality. Code violation, exercise sabotage, compromise of operational integrity, unethical conduct toward personnel. Each line landed like a controlled detonation, precise, contained. Irrefutable. Nathan's jaw tightened until a faint pulse appeared near his ear. He opened his mouth once, maybe to protest, maybe to bargain, but the inspector's raised palm shut down any attempt before it began. A quiet gesture, but absolute. Step forward, the officer ordered. Nathan obeyed, but the movement lacked the confidence he had wielded like a weapon only hours earlier. His steps were stiff, coordination fragmented by adrenaline and shame. He didn't look at Rebecca, not directly. His gaze slid past her, then dipped to the floor, as though meeting her eyes might confirm a truth he wasn't ready to acknowledge. The inspectors escorted him out, no handcuffs, no force. Just the silent, unbreakable authority of the chain of command. When the door shut behind them, the room seemed to exhale as one organism. Recruits who had once smirked behind her back now stood sharper, straighter. Their shoulders rolled back, chests lifted. Not in fear. Fear would have made their hands shake, but in something closer to recalibrated respect. There was a gravity to the moment, the unspoken admission that they had misread everything, every clue she had quietly given, every skill she had concealed with disciplined restraint. One young recruit swallowed hard, Another tucked his thumbs along the seam of his trousers to keep his hands from fidgeting. A third pressed her lips together, eyes flicking away as if ashamed to meet Rebecca's gaze. Rebecca didn't move for several seconds. She simply observed them with a calm, unreadable expression, no triumph, no reproach, only a measured stillness. Her heartbeat was steady, barely elevated, as though her body had already transitioned back into operational neutrality. Then she stepped forward. Her boots touched the ground with that same soundless precision she had carried since day one. She looked at each recruit individually, not a lingering stare, but long enough to register them, to let them feel the weight of accountability without humiliation. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, level, and free of ornament. Do better. No rhetoric, no lecture. Just 2 words delivered with the authority of someone who had spent a lifetime earning the right to say them. The impact was visible. One recruit's breath caught, chest expanding sharply. Another nodded, one small, controlled, the kind of nod someone gives when they've just been handed a directive they intend to follow. A third straightened even more, as if trying to align herself with the standard Rebecca embodied. There was no applause this time, no ceremony. Just a deep, reverent silence that felt heavier than noise. Rebecca turned away, her posture composed, her steps steady. She didn't need to witness their reactions to know the message had landed. Her role wasn't to be admired, it was to ensure the integrity of the institution she served. Behind her, Miller watched with a faint exhale, a brief flicker of something in his eyes. Respect, yes, but also recognition, not of her rank, not even of her mission, but of the restraint she carried like a secondary weapon, the discipline to correct without humiliating, to command without raising her voice. As Rebecca walked past him, Miller gave a subtle nod. A small movement, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but one that acknowledged the full scope of what she had just accomplished. Justice had been delivered, but Rebecca's mission was not finished. Rebecca waited until the last clusters of personnel drifted toward the exits, their voices low, their movements careful, as though any nose might fracture the gravity still hanging in the hall. She remained in the same position she had held throughout the aftermath, shoulders aligned, hands steady at her sides, her breathing a controlled cadence that barely disturbed the rise and fall of her chest. When Miller approached, he did so with steps softened by respect rather than protocol. He stopped at arm's length, posture exact but not rigid. A faint tension pulsed along his jawline, something between admiration and the lingering hum of everything he had witnessed. Rebecca inclined her head, just enough to acknowledge him without breaking her disciplined frame. Excellent insight, Sergeant. The words were quiet, calibrated, no embellishment, no ceremony. Yet Miller's micro-expression, a brief tightening at the corner of his eyes, followed by a restrained exhale, revealed the impact. He had known she was operating at a level far above anyone in that room, but hearing gratitude from someone of her caliber shifted something internally. He nodded once, low, deliberate, a gesture that carried the weight of professional recognition. Before either could say more, 2 operators emerged from the side corridor. They wore unmarked uniforms, the kind that blended into any environment yet carried a presence felt more than seen. Their gait was silent but assured, the gait of individuals who lived in classified deployments, where even footsteps were calculated. Rebecca turned toward them, her expression smoothing back into operational neutrality. The lead operator gave her a subtle chin lift, acknowledgement, confirmation, extraction. The second scanned the remaining shadows of the hull, ensuring privacy without appearing too. As Rebecca stepped forward to join them, every detail of her movement reflected years of conditioning. The smooth shift of weight, the regulation heel to toe, the natural alignment of her spine. Nothing hurried, nothing uncertain. Her departure wasn't grand, it didn't need to be. She simply crossed the hall like someone passing through a layer of air that no one else could feel, like slipping from one operational phase into another. A few recruits watched from a distance, their eyes steady, their breathing taut. One swallowed with a visible movement along the throat. Another pressed her fingertips together to quiet the tremor that had started when Rebecca walked by. None approached her, none dared. The doors opened with a muted hydraulic hiss as she exited with the 2 operators. The light outside caught briefly along the insignia she had revealed earlier, glinting for a fraction of a second before she disappeared beyond the threshold. In that instant, the hall shifted, conversations halted. Even those who had doubted her felt something settle into place, and understanding that the quiet, composed woman they had misread was operating on a level they could barely comprehend. Her presence there ended. Her mission continued. Somewhere beyond that hallway, another unit, another command, another operation awaited her assessment. She worked in the spaces between official reports, where ethics were tested in silence and misconduct hid in plain sight. She evaluated resilience, leadership, integrity, elements no classroom could teach and no ranking board could fully measure. A recruit in the corner exhaled shakily, the air catching before releasing in a thin stream. Miller stood where she had left him, his hands behind his back, posture now subtly reshaped. Not humbled, sharpened, no one in that room would ever underestimate a quiet woman in uniform again. Her shadow lingered long after her footsteps faded, a reminder that the most dangerous, most capable operators rarely announced themselves. They simply moved with purpose, executed their duties, and vanished into the next classified corridor of their lives. If you want more stories like this of strength disguised as silence, of justice executed with precision, make sure to subscribe to the channel.